Good evening. Bonsoir. Anin Unukut. Prime Minister. See, I didn't get to do that before, but it actually feels pretty good. Sophie, I think Sophie is here as well. Your Excellencies, Your Honor, RCGS Fellows, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Canada's Centre for Geography and Exploration. We are all delighted that you're able to join us in this special event to honor Dr. Joe MacInnis. He is here, right? I was looking for him. He's there. Okay, good. Joe, you're there. Good. Je voudrais tout d'abord rappeler que nous sommes réunis sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé des Algonquins, qui sont les gardiens de ces terres et entretiennent des relations avec elles depuis des milliers d'années. And I further acknowledge and recognize that the Society's work reaches across all of the distinct First Nations, Métis homelands, and Inuit Nunangat. And for this, we are all grateful. Je suis Catherine McKenna, ancienne ministre canadienne de l'Environnement et du Changement climatique et ministre des Infrastructures. I'm still a climate activist. Don't worry, that hasn't stopped. And also protector of nature and oceans. Je suis très honorée d'être votre maîtresse de cérémonie ce soir. J'aimerais saluer et remercier brièvement quelques invités de marque de s'être joints à nous, notamment le très honorable Justin Trudeau, 23e Premier ministre du Canada, son épouse Sophie et leurs enfants, ainsi que la mère de Sophie, Estelle Blais, et Sacha Trudeau et son épouse Zoe. We also welcome His Excellency Alfredo Martinez Serrano, Ambassador of Spain, my good friend, the Honorable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, 29th Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, and almost the longest serving, Chief Perry Bellegarde, Honorary President of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, the Honorable Lois Mitchell, President of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, James Cameron, wearer of the medal, undersea explorer and filmmaker, which really understates your achievements, and of course, Dr. Joe MacInnis and his family in attendance today. Okay, so you've heard a lot about Joe's achievements, Dr. Joe, but there's one you haven't heard about, and it's one that he and I share. He was also captain of the University of Toronto varsity swim team. Go Blues! But we heard a really great talk, and I think we often come to events like these, and you don't know what to expect. And having a conversation about mentorship, I think, was actually really meaningful and a reminder of how important mentorship is and the role that we can all play and the exchanges that we have that also, you know, for those of us who are older, can also help advance us on life's journey. And when I received the special honor as well from the RCGS, it was from Joe. And it was a lovely ceremony. He said very nice words about me, but what I remember most is that he went over to my daughter. Now, my daughter's a teenager, and for those of you who have teenagers, they have their own styles. At that point, it was COVID, so I kind of let it go. Her hair was white on one side and black on the other side at this fancy event, and Joe went over to her, and she just learned to dive. And you started talking to her about diving. You asked her what she loved about it, and she was so inspired. And then, you know what Joe did? He sent her one of his books. And that's what mentorship is about. We heard about the role he played with James Cameron, and then 50 years later, doing the same thing with just another young person and really inspiring them. So with that, I'm hoping you all have a glass of champagne. If you don't, run to the bar. I'd love to raise a toast. Oh, Joe definitely needs one. Get Joe one. Oh, and James. Okay, we're all still scrambling here. All right, I think we're all kind of ready. I'd like to raise a toast to an incredible Canadian, a wonderful lifelong mentor, a great ocean explorer, and someone who understands the incredible importance of protecting the only planet we have, Dr. Joe MacInnis.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm John Geiger. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. And I would like to begin by thanking James Cameron and Kim Butts and Maria Wilhelm, all from the Avatar Alliance Foundation, for being here and making this such a special occasion. Without your generous support and extraordinary vision, this event would not be possible. For nearly a century, the success of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society has relied on exceptional people. Nobel Prize winner Frederick Banting, pioneering Arctic ice researcher Isabel Mora Dunbar, who was one of the first scientists to explore the use of remote sensing for data collection, and many others like Dr. Dave Williams, aquanaut and astronaut, who's here, and Dr. Denis Saint-Onge, who I believe is here also, the legendary geomorphologist and expert on the polar continental shelf. Dr. Joe MacInnis exemplifies this kind of leadership, a member of the Order of Canada and the Royal Canadian Geographical Society's honorary vice president. Joe is a pioneer in undersea science and engineering, an explorer, scientist, physician, and storyteller. His work spans decades, and you've been hearing about it, and you'll hear more about it. A man whose expertise is renowned around the world, Joe has worked on more than 50 undersea science and engineering projects with the Canadian, French governments, U.S. government, and the Russian Academy of Sciences. He's led 10 polar research expeditions and inspired countless more. He was the first person to explore the freezing waters beneath the North Pole and among the first to dive to the Titanic. He's the author of 9 books and a mentor to many people. And indeed, one of Joe's books, called The Land That Devours Ships, we're talking about mentorship and inspiration. It's his account of his expedition to locate and visit the Arctic shipwreck Breadalbane off Beechy Island. And I have to say, Joe, that book, which I have been looking for but can't find, but I know I still got, was the inspiration for my own decades-long fascination about the fate of the lost Franklin expedition. So I think that book sparked that interest, which has resulted in 2 books that I've written on Franklin and my involvement, but also my involvement in this society, because I wouldn't be here were it not for that research. So I probably wouldn't have this job if I hadn't read that book. So thank you, Joe. When I accepted I had been volunteer president, so a predecessor of Lois Mitchell. When I accepted the role of CEO, I said there are 3 people in this country that have to be celebrated, embraced, and be central to the society. And they weren't. One was already a fellow, but they were basically just another name on a long list of fellows. And those 3 people exemplified courage, inspired wonder about our planet and life on this planet. And they're people who embodied the true spirit of exploration, the fact that it's about the search, not the finding. And those people were Dr. Roberta Bondar, Dr. Wade Davis, and Dr. Joe MacInnis. And I'm pleased to say they're all honorary vice presidents of the society. And I remember it wasn't very many years ago, Joe, I met you at a cafe on Bloor and asked if you'd take on this responsibility, and you were extremely kind in accepting that request, and you've been extremely kind ever since as a donor of precious artifacts, including that red phone that you all need to look at when you leave. And many other artifacts, and just your mentorship and friendship, your inspirational talks with our staff, our team, about what we're doing, the importance of what we're doing. It means so much. So Anyway, I just wanted to say, Joe, that you've been a treasure to the Society. Thank you so much. So now it is my special honor to introduce the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. I think you know he's the Prime Minister of Canada. And what you don't know is he is a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. He was made a fellow in 2000 when we had the official opening of this building. But he slipped out a back door and ran off down the road before we had a chance to present him with his fellow's badge. So, Prime Minister, if you don't mind coming up and accepting your fellow's badge. So here you are. You get some bling too. You want to put it on?
I will put it on. You put it on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, that's very good of you. Oh, there we go.
I'm happy to.
There we go.
For the bling.
Is that good? Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for this honor and the bling. It is a real pleasure to be back here and to continue to support and encourage the extraordinary leadership that the Canadian Geographical Society has always exemplified. The willingness to push boundaries while at the same time remaining deeply in awe and empowered and in service of the extraordinary land that governs so much of us in every possible way. So it is always a pleasure to be here, and I cherish this honor. But being here for Joe tonight is an extraordinary privilege for me. My brother Sash and I will tell you, my father knew a lot of people. Our father knew a lot of people, but he didn't have many friends. He was very, very selective about the kinds of people that he would hold around him, and especially the kind of people that he would vacation with and bring into the closest and most private family circles. And Joe was always there. From the number of vacations we went on together, the conversations, the times as a family growing up where my father and Joe would have these just unbelievable conversations that would span hours about, well, for us it was sort of obscure minutiae, as what was going on at the bottom of the ocean and how deep how long one could actually stay at 200 feet below, and when you had to switch towards mixes. But I'll never forget the day Joe showed up at 24 Sussex Drive with diving gear and had us put it on. I was probably 10 or 11 years old. My brother's younger. And we got to see what it was like to breathe underwater. And we were absolutely hooked. And all the incredible experiences, which include diving trips that included shots of white rum by the airstrip. I was 20 by that time, but a little older than 10. It wasn't so much the what we were doing, amazing adventures of discovery. It was the way you got to be when you were around Joe. The way he'd make you think. The way he'd make you just settle into the moment you were in and draw every little bit of the experience out you possibly could. The guidance, the leadership, the mentorship Joe has provided so many people, but Alexandre and myself included, has deeply shaped and affected this country. I remember having an argument early on with Sophie about the fact that I really needed to have more older and wiser friends who could mentor me as I was looking into a political path. And I was stubborn as all hell. And I said, I had the best mentor one could imagine for 28 years of my life, and I don't need another because Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the only one who taught me anything. And then I'd pause and say, well, except Joe. Yeah, well, no, you didn't need to push me on that one. Joe has been a presence, a guide, a counsel, a friend, And the most incredible thing, and those who've been mentored by Joe will know this better than anyone else, and a student of mine at the same time. His way of leading, of guiding, was to learn from you, to draw from you your perspectives, your thoughts, your understanding, your explanations of everything, which did a much better job of having you challenge your assumptions and your reflections better than any external person could challenge you on that. And I'm often reminded of an old, perhaps apocryphal, but Zen saying, where the truly great man is the one who impacts on the lives of every person he meets without them ever having known they were impacted by it. And Joe half succeeded in that. Because he does pass through like a wisp, unnoticed, undemanding of attention and accolades. But everyone who has been impacted by Joe knows it, and feels it, and is transformed by it. Part of me is frustrated every time I have to explain to someone who full well should know exactly who Joe MacInnis is, who Joe MacInnis is. I feel like I've spent my life talking about this incredible person who is so impactful and so important that so few of us know. But I also know that's probably pretty deliberate on his part, because his connection, his devotion, his commitment to those he loves and believes in, his commitment, his connection, his devotion to the oceans, to this land, to this planet, is something that one needs to pause and celebrate, and we should learn how to celebrate louder and broader. But right now, in a room full of friends, I just say thank you for being here tonight for this most extraordinary of men. Thank you, Joe, for everything you've done. Thank you to your family for sharing you with us. Merci, mon cher ami.
Okay, the worst thing is following the Prime Minister after he's made amazing words. But that was really lovely, Prime Minister. And I mean, Joe's obviously very special to you and all of you in the room. So hopefully you have time to talk to each other about Joe and how awesome Joe is. And if only we all could be a little more awesome like Joe. All right, I would like to introduce someone else, Andy Bowen. We heard a fair bit about him from both Joe and James when they were speaking. Andy also benefited from Dr. Joe's mentorship, so he may tell us about that. But he's incredible in his own right. Andy is a director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in the United States, but he's a real pioneer in the development of robotic systems, extending our reach and abilities into the deepest parts of our oceans. Apparently, there's also another great story. If you were at the event earlier, they talked about having to basically cut a massive hole in the side of a ship. Apparently, Andy was part of the operation that had to cut a hole downstairs to bring the submersible in. So maybe he'll tell us about that story too. Anyway, Andy, come on up. Oh, there he is.
Thank you very much. Being a humble engineer, I'm humbled by being here today. It's an incredible event, and I'm so grateful for having been invited. You know, Joe has been a presence in my life more than perhaps he knows. As a young, and you might not know it by my accent, but I'm actually a Canadian, having been affected or maybe transformed, I think, by an interaction with Joe many, many years ago. As a young child growing up in Montreal, I became fascinated with the ocean and decided that I was going to become a commercial diver. Upon hearing that news, my father, his hair stood on end because in those days commercial divers didn't last very long, and promptly wrote a letter to Joe asking if his son could come and visit. And Joe wrote back and arranged a visit to the Royal Ontario Museum, and much like my good friend Jim Cameron, who we'll introduce in just a moment, I was affected by that visit, and it changed my life. And I went off to college in the United States, never left, and have been working at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution almost all of my professional career. And I feel as though I've made a difference, and I feel as though Joe's role in helping facilitate that is something that I really wanted to share with you. I think it's incredibly important. So being an engineer, I'm not particularly well versed at introducing someone such as Jim Cameron. So I consulted and I read something that I think FDR wrote, which was be sincere, be brief, and then be seated. So I'm going to do my best at that. But keeping in the theme of threes, you know, I've known Jim for 30 years. We go back, and there have been some incredible opportunities to interact, and I feel Jim is a friend and a peer. My career took a different turn. I didn't become a world-renowned filmmaker, but we're going to try that, yeah. So I ended up in Woods Hole in 1985. I started working in Dr. Ballard's laboratory, and in those days it was discover the Titanic, and the first job I had was building a little robot to go inside the Titanic. And not long after that, this fellow shows up in Woods Hole, and we were used to entertaining visitors, of course, and it was a Hollywood person, which seemed odd, but you know, we showed him what we were up to. Jim sort of took a lot of notes, asked a lot of sort of questions you didn't expect to hear from someone from Hollywood, and then went away. And within a few short years was on jet fuel in the ocean and doing incredible things. Aliens of the Deep, unbelievable. Titanic, of course, it is the default. The way in which he told that story through the use of technology was incredible. 10 years go past, Jim shows up again, and we were working on a project to build a robot to go to the deepest part of the ocean. And asked a lot of questions, and this time we took them a lot more seriously, and we were answering questions about what we were doing, how we were doing it, and Jim went off again, quiet. Deepsea Challenger, which of course, hopefully all of you have had a chance to see, and it's an incredible tour de force. I mean, at Woods Hole, we operate a submersible. It's been in operation for 50 years. The technology and the innovation that went into the Deepsea Challenger in such a thoughtful way really, I think, is a transformative piece of equipment. And recently, maybe 10 years on, Jim has been back. And I'm kind of scratching my head wondering what's next. So, you know, yeah. One thing I can tell you for sure is it will be a fantastic ride, and I couldn't be more honored to introduce my friend, Jim Cameron.
Well, this is two tough acts to follow. Thank you for those remarks, Eddie. It means a lot, and we do go back quite a ways. And we are now fellows in law. What are we? Fellows. Yeah, so I met Andy when I was doing research for The Abyss in 1987 or 88, and we subsequently collaborated on a lot of things, so it means a lot to see him up here speaking and introducing me. That means a lot. But I'll tell you what meant a lot emotionally for me was the Prime Minister's remarks about Joe, because he was precisely describing the man I know. and triangulating from a completely different perspective, one of family and growing up with him in a strange way. And for those of you that weren't here for our earlier panel, which includes yourself, Mr. Prime Minister, Joe and I go back to when I was 14. And we didn't meet for quite some time, but we corresponded. And the letter, he sent me 2 letters. One was in response to my request for the blueprints for his underwater lab, his underwater habitat. At the age of 14, I was determined to build my own and get in it, as one does. And the second letter was, I asked him, how do you make the windows? And he sent me the name of a company that makes plexiglass, and I've literally been in communication with them since then, believe it or not. And they sent me a piece of plexiglass, and I thought, well, I've got the window, so now I just have to build the rest of it. But that shouldn't be too difficult. And in fact, this is kind of top secret, but not really. We're looking to build a new sub design with a company that I'm associated with that will use the same acrylic company as then to build the hull that will keep me alive in that sub. So they haven't gone anywhere, and I haven't gone anywhere. I mean, we're still doing the same thing. So Joe's message to me, and I'm not sure I really was aware of its impact at the time, was one of empowerment. You know, a young kid growing up in rural Canada, 14 years old, suddenly is communicating, corresponding with the most esteemed oceanographer. I always thought of you at that time, Joe, as the Jacques Cousteau of Canada. And, you know, the work that you were doing inspired me so much. This was in the let's see, when would this have been? Late 60s. So we were going to space, Apollo program, we meaning the US obviously, but we, the human race, were going into space and going into inner space at the same time. And your work was at the cutting edge of putting humans into the deep ocean on diving rigs, ambient pressure, not in a sub where you don't feel the pressure, but feeling it on your body and in your brain and in your lungs and your bloodstream, and how to keep people safe, how to have them live and work at, what was it, Joe, 200 meters, almost 700 feet? Yeah, unbelievable. And so that's mixed gas diving. And we're talking about the cutting edge, brand new stuff. People had never done any of this before, or very little of it. But watching the evolution of his career from his fascination with the human factors and the physiology as a doctor, becoming then fascinated by the psychology of human factors, people in highly stressful situations, and then extrapolating that outward and looking at people in the military, people in combat, people in, you know, Antarctic bases, Arctic expeditions, things like that, and looking at the human factors and the lessons and the commonality of that. And I think that you're absolutely right. He listens very, very well, and he makes a lot of notes, and sometimes he's got a little recorder going in his pocket. And then what emerges is not Joe dominating the conversation in the moment. It's some incredibly lucid writing that comes out of that later as he connects the dots between the different patterns of leadership in all of these different fields. But it's always the one common factor is human beings under stress, having to make rapid decisions, having to keep cohesion in a team. And so I'm sitting here listening to your remarks and thinking, we have this incredible example of leadership, one of the finest leaders in the world, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Joe might have been an early influence on him. And whenever I went into a hard project, especially in a deep ocean project, I would ask his advice. I would even ask him to join me in the front lines. And I would listen to what he said about the psychological dynamics of the team. Because you don't get anything done without a great team. And you have to inspire them and lead them and so on. And it's often with engineers or even in a creative, engineering is highly creative, much more so than people think. They think it's all just numbers. But also in a creative, technical realm like the kind of filmmaking that I do, it's a bit like herding cats. People are all over the place. And there's deep insecurities, and there's competition and all those things. And Joe helped me navigate through those things. And I have to say that the things that I've accomplished both in film, which is, you know, there's a small core team that develops the technique. We may have 1,000 extras, but that's not the point. There's always a small core team. And with the submersible projects and the deep ocean expeditions, it's all about that small team and the psychology of that. And I've learned so many lessons from Joe. And one of the things that has really struck me today is how generous he is with his time, with his thoughts. He'll listen, he'll observe quietly, and then he'll just give me some gift of wisdom that he's earned from all of these different walks of life that he's been a part of. And so, you know, looking back, I realize how important he's been for me in the things that I've accomplished. So I just want to thank all of you for coming here to honor my friend, Dr. Joe MacInnis. I think we can give him another round of applause. And Joe, it's time to stand up here and face the music. I have a little something here for you, Joe. And in my family, we don't use paper wrapping. We just use bags that we recycle endlessly. And my wife loves purple, so you... And if you'll open that, I'll explain what it is. Okay. It's not a great gift if you have to explain it, but... I actually love purple, too.
It's got a tactile touch to it.
Yeah, I think you just...
Yeah, go. Careful.
It's okay, it's not fragile. So what we have here, this doesn't look like much, but this is a block. This is a block of syntactic foam flotation, which is what the submersible is made from. Somebody asked me what it's made of. It's made out of this. It's very light, and it's designed to withstand the crushing depth of 16,500 pounds per square inch. And this piece has been to the Challenger Deep as part of the additional buoyancy that we added in the back of the science drawer on March 26, 2012. So it's inscribed here at the top. This went down.
You always find a way.
So it gives the date and the Challenger Deep East Basin, just to be clear, and the depth 35,787 feet, to Dr. Joe MacInnis, legend, mentor, shipmate, friend. And then me, and then this at the bottom, I don't know what the hell that is. That was already on there.
Oh, thank you. I won't pretend. I'm really loving this. I mean, my synapses are lit up like a Christmas tree. It's amazing, you know, to be present at your own eulogy. and to be digging it, you know, really digging it. I'm going to try to be brief. But listen, thank you, dear friend, for always remembering. Thank you, dearest friend, for always remembering. Andy, thank you. And thank all of you for your generous thoughts and your kind and generous thoughts. I'm just the luckiest guy in the world to have such friends and such family. I think of Laura and Leo and Jeff and Yvonne and Jordan and Chris, and of course the keeper of the flame, my wife, Debbie. They have given me moments that are just so deep and powerful within me. But I'm going to end, and we've got to keep this brief. I can end with a thought. First of all, thank you again, but if I'd known that my heart attack and my stroke would have led to this moment, I would have had them sooner.
I'd like to thank everyone again for coming. Please stay. There's lots of hospitality to be had and lots of chances to talk to Dr. Joe and our other special guests. And I also want to just end on a huge thank you to my team, the RCGS and Can Geo team that have worked so hard to make this evening possible, this incredible exhibit possible. So without the help of those people, some of whom are in this room, none of this would have happened. So thank you, everyone, again.